have to think in my mind how it's going to work. And I come to go see this person. And I know that she was a psychologist. And I know that the tendency that this vehicle has that I'm working on has she into tantrums, getting upset and dealing with things. She found, I could be wrong, but I think psychological ways of dealing with them, of getting around them in order to avoid confrontation and make things pleasant on both sides. And I want to know if I do this time, how would I be able to recognize if something like that's being used, and if I do recognize how I'd handle it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I'd forget that.
Okay.
And I don't know, but I'm afraid to correct me, but first of all, you don't want to think about it too much, because it could make you too suspicious of trying to see actions that may be strategy. But you can be aware, certainly aware that this might be taking place, and but you don't want to be paranoid over it. And I don't think it's going to. You shouldn't pay too much attention to it.
Well, I would think that the only reason this individual would do anything would be in order to handle it if you were misbehaving. But we don't plan on you going to misbehave. In other words, if you're nice, I don't see any reason or anybody, because you have to have an incentive to use psychology.
I think he's saying that maybe she would think a certain way and say certain things, hoping it would bring a certain response, having nothing to do with controlling his.
Is that what you're saying?
And also, if she wanted to say, why?
Not using psychology on him, to get certain responses from him. Is that what you're asking? Go ahead.
And then on the coming it's the same thing, but I don't really know. I'm trying to think what she's been going through. And I know that I think she's been visited by Cody and Steelers, Emily Durden, and Emmett there, and I don't know all the people, but I don't know what she knows. So I know that I'm going to have to be very careful about questions she asks. If she asks me questions about me, like, I don't know, I'm going to have to be careful I'm not getting set up for her to, ask me something, and by the response I get would either verify what she knew or, I think I'm getting something, but I know we're supposed to try and set the record straight. I'm not sure.
That's just any opportunities that you get. But see, the fact that you know that there's a possibility that she might set you up with certain questions, just keep it in mind. So anytime you're asked a question, think about it a second before you answer it. And then if you think about it more after you answer it, and you realize that that maybe you didn't say enough, that you might have been asked it for reasons different than the obvious reasons, then you need to cover your best that way. But I wouldn't pay too much attention to it.
You just have to be mentally alert and keen all the time, but just don't be suspicious. Very obvious that you're suspicious. You just
first of all, what we're trying to do is get you to be confident in what you have become, and to be proud of what you have become, and not because if you are vulnerable, if you feel weak and vulnerable and afraid to handle relationships with these people that you come in contact with, you won't pass the test very well, because they'll tangle you up and get you in. So you just can't afford to be weak. You've got to, no one, including anybody you're going to visit, has the right to put you in spots that would make you weaken or force you to say things that you don't know how to handle. So if anyone tries to do that, you could say, just, back off a minute, and I feel like, mainly if you have the right frame of mind and you feel good about yourself and you know you have nothing to be ashamed of, you're only proud of what you have done and what you have become, then I think you could face and handle it, because you're much more mature than they are. The maturity has nothing to do with years. There's not one of you who might visit someone who is not considerably more wise and more mature than anybody you can visit. And if you keep that in mind, then you should be able to make them happy and soothe their anxieties and not be causing any trouble. If you're the more wise and the more mature, you're not going to let somebody touch your trouble. But you are going to help them not have false ideas and think things that aren't so, or that are derogatory.
I was wondering, I don't know if I go to visit my parents or something, they'd like to take some photographs of me with them or with their family.
Sure, why not? You bet. Somebody?
This isn't, I don't know if this is really a question, but I just try to imagine myself in that situation, and I'm just trying to think, well, what is really going to be happening? Is it that they're going to, that situation, that environment is going to, like pulling on those things that I haven't really conquered or gotten under control, and it's going to just bring the surface and show me what, where my weaknesses are, where my connections need to be strengthened.
Well, we don't feel like we would have been given you this homework to study if we didn't feel like your next level mind should be in a place to stay in control over whatever genetic structure might be pulled by these ties. And we know it's going to be a test. And you want to recognize it in the same way that you would if you went to a movie or something and felt old genes respond to areas that you quickly had to put a halt to. It's known to be no different if you encounter situations like that, should you be called upon to go on this test. But we feel like you ought to be able to handle it. You ought to be able to prove yourself to yourself in this circumstance.
And if you feel the draw, you want to put out a blank card.
Just like you do all the time.
To callousing the roots or the connections. In a way, it's almost kind of seems like it's going to be funny to look at them for what they really are. Humans that are.
I think for the most part, some of you who may fear circumstances like, let's say, that you're going to visit a human father that might have been very, very domineering last time you saw him. That picture may have totally changed during the time that you have been gone. And that individual that you are expecting to act in that way, because of your absence, or partially because of your absence, and maybe because of other experiences that individual has had, may have totally changed, and you may not have nearly the thing to deal with that you anticipated you might have to deal with. But the worst that you could expect would be that same aspect that you had to deal with before. I mean, that's the worst thing you could expect, and you certainly would know how to handle it better now than you did then. Not to let anyone tell you. I mean, first of all, you're an adult. You're a lot of years older. You're all of age. And even if you were in the human world and had never been in this classroom, and you went back to visit at this age, even if you left your husband and children to go visit your folks, say for example, and they started telling you what you should be doing in your life, you wouldn't take it. You would say, we live our life a certain way, and it has been satisfactory to us, and it's the way we want to live. And I respect the way that you want to live. I'm not here to tell you how to live. Do you see what I'm saying? You could face it in the same way you would face it if they were telling you how to live if you were doing something different. Because you're all grown. And more than likely, they're not going to be telling you. They're not going to act in the way that you remember them when you were so young that they felt like they could be telling you.
If they'd grown in the right way, at least it'd be that way. Are there any questions in regards to the task that we gave you all? About writing lessons? We don't want any philosophizing. Okay, we got one lesson from someone, and it's just strictly philosophy. And that's not what we're talking about.
We want practical, applicable lessons and segments.
You see what we're saying?
And we don't want to have to give them to you, because we want you to find out what we're talking about. Because this is an area that you need to develop.
You can talk about the genes if you want to.
Sure.
You know.
That's many segments right there.
We can talk about reactions to individuals,
Restraint.
restraint. In other words, people think nothing of telling you off or giving you the finger if you happen to get in their way or something, or something like that. Well, that's no restraint at all. In other words, it's very low human characteristics. And
you want to take a laboratory approach, an academic laboratory approach. Like we got one little lesson that was titled Restraint, but all it did was philosophically talk about the value of restraint. It didn't practically come down to a circumstance. What do you do in this circumstance if you restrain yourself from this kind of action or response, and the payoff is this? In other words, we want it practical, applicable. We don't want it philosophical.
We don't want it written like Ruffles was written. You know what we're talking about? That is something that could only be understood by, the actual meaning could only be understood by you all. But what we want, like Joe said, is something that is down to earth, that you can teach to humans in order to build their genes up to a higher level.
I didn't want to get off the track, but in this connection with mentioning to people about genes,
In this lesson.
yeah, apparently it's okay to speak to them, actually mention genes and how they work and everything.
Why not?
What about genetic engineering, like the track they seem to be on? I mean,
You don't know anything about that. We want you to talk about what you know about. We don't want you to talk about things that they're doing that may be off the track. We want you to talk about what you have learned to be true.
just, in other words, just what we've been taught.
We don't want you to
You're
write
you're doing genetic engineering on yourself. And that's correct genetic engineering.
We don't want you writing about what you've read in the newspaper or what you see on television or read in a book or something, or what you learned back in college or in high school or something. We want you to write about what you have been taught.
What you have
since
experienced.
In this.
It will help you zero in on what you have experienced. It's like many of you haven't really added it up. You've just gone through a period of change without realizing practically what those aspects of change were and how you could voice them in very simple laboratory-type terminology.
And don't just write something to be sending it to us. In other words, when the ones who were working on the movie script, they would write something and we'd send it back to them and say, you can do better. See if you can't bring in a little bit more information or make it more interesting. And I don't know how many times we did that to them. In other words, just because you write something down doesn't mean that you send it to me. You look it over and see if it is really worth putting it on paper.
If it doesn't say any more or have any more value than things that humans can write, then it's not worth putting it.
What you want to reveal is something that they don't know about. And it doesn't mean that they don't know about restraint, but they have no restraint. In other words, they need to know that they have to develop restraint. They need to know they have to not be so vulgar in the way they express themselves. They have to know that their conduct has to be more refined. They can't just take life so lightly. In other words, they've had to grow in the right direction, in a higher direction. They can't go backwards. We used an example on the last tape that on this TV show we heard the other morning briefly about how they talked about allowing children to have birth control pills and teach them how to protect themselves from pregnancy instead of teaching them restraint. In other words, it's an expensive thing now to have sex when you're old enough to have it. And instead of teaching them that it isn't right to do it.
The value of changing the norm, that could be a good little topic, but we're not trying to, we don't want to give you topics. We want you all to do this, because it should have registered on you how the things that you have learned could apply to them if they want improvement in areas. So these are lessons. It's like we said, that you go in a church vestibule or something and see on a rack a bunch of little topics, and they would apply it to the one who was looking for that, interested in that particular topic. So they all should be interesting. They should all have the characteristic of being interesting. They all should have the characteristic of being something different from what any human could write.
We've talked to you all about many subjects, like let's take marriage for instance. Why isn't marriage working well? Okay, that's a very good topic. And what if the marriage doesn't work? What do? Go and find somebody else and get married again?
Lord never condemned divorce. He only condemned remarriage.
Okay. So these are the things you want, and we want you to exercise your mind, because it's there in your mind. It's just a matter of you bringing it to the surface and putting down on paper something that could be helpful to somebody in this world in order to bring them up to a more refined level and have better characteristics and less animal characteristics. Remember, man is just a level above it. In fact, they are considered animals. It's just that they're a different type and a little bit more refined than the ones who crawl around on the form slaves.
In other words, if people who are living in what we call this society today, this generation today, if they, like the example he used of their taking for granted that every teenager needs to learn all that there is to know about birth control apparatuses and pills and so forth, then in other words, they're going to continue to make the society deteriorate more and more and more. And what you want to do is think of certain aspects that could begin to turn that around. Make it sound why is it worthwhile? Why is it, what can you tell me about restraint that I can buy? In other words, is there any reason? Because, see, the time you were growing up and during the period you've been in class, the world has gone at a very accelerated pace towards zero restraint. And the only way the next level teaches them restraint is by dropping diseases here and there and seeing that occurs, which forces people, like the venereal diseases is about the only thing causes restraint. And humans, because it scares them. And yet they even think that they learn how to master that by having regular checkups and taking that number of penicillin shots. You know, because they still want to be relaxed with it. And but the next level will still cause a new one and new things come in. But you want to appeal to what can be gained. Because you know what they all want? They all want freedom. And yet they indulge in the very things that give them the opposite of freedom. You know what I mean by real freedom? They want freedom to act as they want to act, and yet nearly every act they get involved in gives them less freedom. Do you follow that? They go out and hook up in a relationship that dissolves all their freedom. They go out and get addicted on the very things that dissolve all their freedom and dictate their lives. And they think what they're doing has put themselves in a position where they're free to do all these things, not realizing they're not free to undo those things. That those things now control their lives. they don't any longer control their lives.
What were those things about when you were talking about disease? Newspaper article came out just recently that AIDS is more prominent in Catholics. And what was it?
Lower income Catholics and I can't remember.
But isn't it funny that they said it's more prominent in Catholics and not necessarily homosexual?
That's like the new disease, like Mr. Cotton.
Who has less restraint? What does the Catholic Church teach?
Right, no birth
control. Okay. And homosexuals, poor guys, they don't have much restraint. Some of them don't, some do, I'm sure. Just like, and even, what other groups? What other is more common? Haitians or whatever it is.
What, for AIDS?
AIDS.
Hemophiliacs.
Hemophiliacs, but they're victims.
Blood
transfusion. The blood transfusion. But it's strictly lack of restraint that this is happening. And so now what you all need
also because their immune systems have become so destroyed. And you know that probably the main reason that homosexuals have been so vulnerable to AIDS is because their immune systems were so injured during the period that they were suffering such guilt from being different. You know, saying I'm an outcast, I've become a monster. My parents, if they knew the way I was, they'd kick me out. Everybody says I'm an oddball. You know, and for years they, what the world calls, they lived in a closet, or they couldn't openly accept what they were. And so during that period, their poor little old immune systems were just going right down the drain.
Stress destroys the immune system. Depression destroys it. And everywhere they turn, the people are quoting the Bible that you can't get to heaven if you're homosexual. And that's pretty bad, you know, for somebody to have to say something like that. So it would destroy. And this would apply to anybody. If you were in the world and everything you did, you just butted your head against the wall and you were not accepted, it would affect your immune system, and chances are if you came in contact with any disease, you would contact it. And so therefore, it's your mental attitude that you can accept. This is another lesson that you can practice. If you can accept what you are, keep your immune system strong, then consequently you won't be a victim of anything, not even AIDS. So it's really, people have to know these things because they don't hear it anywhere else. You all have the inside of a lot of knowledge, and you can't tell them where you got it. But the thoughts that you have can be very helpful to individuals.
It doesn't really matter where you got it, because what you know, for the most part, is what you have experienced in your own change. In other words, we have taught you to understand what you must go through, and then you have gone through it. You see what we're saying? So when you're writing from experience. You're not writing something that you heard somebody say, you're passing on the idea. No, nobody wants to buy that. That's what we were saying, philosophy. We don't want you passing on philosophy.
Well, I put a segment on the Kindle this morning, and I'd really appreciate any help in staying on the track. I hear what you're saying. One minute I say, yeah, that's right. You know, that's what I did. And I say, well, maybe I didn't do it. And I really realize I don't know.
Okay. We'll read it, and if I read one, we got two the other day. I read one. I didn't read the second one. Did you read the second one? Was it philosophy also?
Well, it just didn't go far enough. It was a nice little statement, but it was also a kind of statement that I think a human could have written.
It has to be better than human. It has to be what you have been taught. You don't draw on your own experiences that you had when you were in the world, or
If
anything
you can't buy
about
something that's more significant because of the experience that you have had than you could find in little Upanishads and ruffles and things that humans could write, then you're not digging deep enough. One thing is, it should dawn on you all what you have learned. You shouldn't take it for granted. You should realize the exceptional experience that you have been through and what has the payoff been. You should be able to then put that in little categories and see all the aspects of it.
Let's say you're going to write a book on how to become better than human. What does it require to become better than human? You've all been through it. You ought to be able to tell.
Or if the humans are going to write, then better than ordinary. You know, if they would be offended by better than human,
Right.
better than ordinary.
How can you upgrade this garden? And actions are the thing that makes things very low on a garden. You know what I mean? Actions. It begins with actions. Actions mean thought, because you have to have an action in order to have thought, you know, or whatever. I don't mean a physical action, but an action in response to somebody else's action. And in other words, you just want to nip it in the bud what is happening on this garden and start upgrading it. And the way to do it is to show them how to do it, because they don't know how to do it. And we want you to think on it. We don't want you to sit down and write something just to be writing. It's going to take a lot of effort on your part to come up with the right things to write down. And it isn't something that the subconscious mind can write. You know, you really have to consciously think it out. And what are you doing when you are thinking it out and drawing it to the surface? You're doing two things. You're making your mind come more to the surface. Plus, the lessons are coming more to the surface. Second, you're putting it into the human, so that the humans can draw upon it. But if you put out some little philosophical thing, the humans will only pick up the philosophy of it.
Pretty words.
And it won't help them, because they can go and sit on transcendental meditation or just listen to a guru talk.
Yeah, go read Khalil Gibran.
Or what?
Go read Khalil Gibran, you know, the prophet.
And that's just what we're after. We want you to push hard and come up with something that is exceptional. You can do it.
When you're trying to describe a certain area, like whatever we've been taught, how much specifics should we give? So it's like, so
Well, you just do it, and we'll tell you if you're going too far, okay? You can't talk about this level.
You can't use the terminology next level. You're not going to use spacecraft. You're not going to talk about UFOs. You're going to talk about, let's say that here is the next level, moving in and saying, how can we change this world over? How can those plants that are ready to be recipients of more refined fertilizer, how can we approach it in a way that will be realistic, non-offensive, and inviting to them, and cause them to change their conduct and their ways, the whole structure of how they think and what motivates them.
It's a job that you can do. That's it.
I'm sort of, I'm off track, I don't know, but it's as simple, what you're saying is as simple as you want to learn thoroughness to fall through. Something you can try, and we walked around the circle for 12 minutes, and I feel like that's one of the things that, one of the most important things that, for me, that has helped me, even though to human would seem ridiculous, is to answer my computer what thoroughness and what an orbit is. And you do something, you go through.
Nothing wrong with a topic like thoroughness if you can express it in an interesting way and using specifics that would really give them something to put their teeth into. Something. If it's just a philosophy about thoroughness.
Somebody you can tell if you want to help learn, if you walk in a circle for X amount of minutes, once a day for so many months, it'll help ingrain in your. I mean, that's how you're talking about.
Yeah, you can talk about your brain as a computer. You can write a lesson of how the brain is a computer. You can write a lesson of how genes is the same as the brain. You can write a lesson of anything that would clarify this. And you can put a little snatch of that in a paragraph if you need to, in the little topic you're writing on, you need some little explanation of that. How you've got to stamp your computer, because they're going to say, stamp your computer? Okay. They're going to go out and buy a postage stamp, put it on their Apple. They won't know what you're talking about.
In talking about what you were talking about, you can even go so far as to say, explaining about thinking more in detail. Remember on the tape we told you about the lady who we bought 3 kinds of beans, and how we couldn't get her to think in detail without grabbing her around the neck and threatening to choke her to death,
And it would have been so easy just go up the register and write void on the ticket that she had rung up and start over and do it the proper way. But since she had that ticket already in there, then she had to go through 3 times the amount of work, and she didn't sell us 3 half-pound packages. She sold us somewhere between 3 half and 3/4 pound packages, but she had to go figure out how to make it even up with what the ticket was. And she was very annoyed that she had to do it. As far as she was concerned, we should have accepted her careless way of calculating it, even though she overcharged us. And they think, oh, what's 20 cents? What's 30 cents?
But the thing of it is, if we can make a little dent in her computer, she was the worst I've seen in a long time with thinking in detail. And but if we could make an impression upon her after she thought, if she had the ability to think about it, after we left, she could either think, well, boy, those people are the cheapest people I've ever seen, or this is ridiculous, Or she could think, what's wrong with me that I've been supposed to do it the right way?
There's a lesson of taking the higher side. Because taking the higher side means, how can I benefit from this and see that those people weren't interested in the 20 cents? They're people who live in accuracy and detail. And I should have wanted to be as accurate in my work. That would be taking the higher side.
In other words, she could see where she was weak. And if she wanted to be something better than what she was, then she could learn from it. Now, let's say that she took the lower side from us. And let's say one of you all wrote a paper about thinking in detail and how to handle circumstances and not let your brain accept less than detail. And she happens to run across that paper. Some kind of, let's say it's printed in it, and she reads it, and she recognizes the fact that she doesn't have that ability to do that. Now, prior to our coming in contact with her, she probably wouldn't even be aware that she couldn't think in detail. But because we made her aware of it by our actions, if she took the higher side, or even if she took the lower side, it still would come into her mind that what she isn't capable of doing is thinking in detail. Now, thinking in detail, you have to give her a solution on how to do it. You can't just write about. You have to
give an interesting example of what detail is and how to accomplish it.
A lot of people think that they were born with all these characteristics, and there's no way to change it. I have to have 10 cups of coffee before I can get up in the morning. And before I'm worth anything.
This woman this morning said I use bad language only when I'm mad, and I don't like to use that language, and I never have liked it at all. But I don't know why I do it, but it's only when I'm real mad that I do it. But she has never made any effort, and it sounds like even today she wasn't going to make any effort. She was just explaining that the only time she uses the language she doesn't like is when she loses her temper, as if to say, this is part of me. And part of me is that when I lose my temper, I say language that I don't like. Isn't that interesting?
This is what we're trying to do. Okay? And we'll have a second.
That's like an idea of if I took the situation at my autocraft task and I see all the waste and all the filth and all the lack of strategy, waste of motion, and the lack of restraint, and get the list goes on and on. And
you could write a book about it.
Or to take a situation like that and say, look what this can become, or
you could do that. You could take a situation that would have several lessons all combined. You certainly could.
And give them a solution. But you don't want to write about it with no solution.
You don't want to write just a criticism of it. You want to take the specifics and how they could be corrected.
Like if you see something happen at your work, you could take notes, write them down while they're fresh in your mind, and then go back to your craft and make something better.
One of the things that disturbs me a lot about humans, because it's so unsafe for them and so lazy on the front of their brain, is that they will accept if you present something to them in a fancy package. They will accept whatever it is that you have given to them and not even stop to examine whether or not it was right. For example, they can put food on your plate that is poor food, poorly prepared, not cooked, doesn't go with other food, everything else. But if they put some garnish on the plate and a sauce and call it by a French name, they will consume it and even sit and applaud how wonderful it was without even the capacity of realizing that they didn't like it and it didn't digest well and that they shouldn't start consuming it. In other words, they are so easy to be brainwashed by advertisement. And I remember when this vehicle was young and I was with people that it was so a part of their life to consume shrimp and boiled shrimp. And it was in my genes that I must learn to do the things that other people consider the right thing to do, and I must learn them. I mean, I didn't think about it. That's just the way I responded because it was in my genes to learn to do it. And so I got brave enough one time, even though I at least knew that boiled shrimp didn't taste good to me. I had to figure out what was wrong with me, or I thought to myself, what is wrong with me that these shrimp don't taste good to me? And one time I heard somebody talking about how some shrimp have an iodine flavor. And I said, oh, it must be that the shrimp that in the area that I get shrimp must have too much iodine flavor. Maybe my system responds poorly to that iodine or something. So I was out with these people one time, and they had shrimp, and they thought, oh, this shrimp is so good. And so I ordered some. After they had tasted theirs, I had ordered something else, and I ordered some. And but the trouble was, I could still taste it. In fact, I had to get up from the table and go throw it out because it still responded so poorly to my system. Now, I was an individual who was conned, as other individuals are, for the most part, into forcing myself to like, without question, whatever it is that was the accepted norm of what was considered to be good things to eat. I accepted all that brainwashing, and I wasn't very sensitive. Therefore, I learned to eat things without tasting them. I learned to turn off my taste. Just turn off my taste. Or it had to just knock me down. Literally knock me down. Most humans, you can't knock them down. They have so successfully turned off their taste that they will consume anything. And if you tell them it has a béarnaise sauce and this and that, you use all these fancy terms and you put it in front of them, and they just rave about it. And it may not sit well. They don't even know if they like it or not, but they're convinced they like it because it's on a fancy menu and all the places in town are serving it, and it's the in thing to have. Now, this is something that desperately needs to be outgrown by humans. Really desperate, because they accept ideas the same way. Not only food, they accept ideas the same way. You put them in a fancy package with fancy words, and they love it. They never stop to think whether they like it or they don't, or it's right or it isn't. If it's the going thing, then they become a part of it. And yet they're the very ones to tell you that they are individuals, that they don't like to just go with the trend, Because it's the trend to say, I'm an individual, and I don't go with the trend. You see? But in fact, they go with all the trends. Even the one that says, I'm an individual, that doesn't go with the trend.
I wanted to clarify something, that Joe didn't go set up that shrimp just because he didn't like the taste of it. It's probably the way the reaction happened. It happened spontaneously.
What do you mean?
You said
I
that.
couldn't help it.
That's what I mean. You didn't go vomit it, spit it up simply because
Didn't taste
it
good.
didn't taste good.
Oh no,
It
no,
happened.
I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop from losing. But I didn't let anybody know that I had thrown it up. I came back to the table and continued to eat, but I didn't eat any more of the shrimp. But I didn't let them know I didn't eat any more of the shrimp because I was like the other humans. I wanted to feel like I certainly wasn't going to knock what they had liked and what I was supposed to like. I felt sorry for myself. What was wrong with me that I couldn't eat that shrimp?
Everybody else did. Anyway, this is just some examples of what we want you to write up and think about it very, very strongly before you put it down on paper.
I'll tell you another little clue, and then we'll leave. I know we got to. But another thing is humans think that you must experience everything, which is the biggest untruth at all. What's the only thing you have to experience is or that you can benefit by, is the confrontation with it. But the choice not to do it serves you just as well as taking the chance of doing it and then becoming blinded by it. You see what I'm saying? A lot of times you get into it, you can't get out of it. So you don't have to experience it. But humans are so brainwashed to believe that you've got to experience everything that they have extremely difficult time after they've been into things for a while, learning how they wish they weren't into them, and then they can't get out of them. Where if they had first examined it and realized, I don't have to do this. T is the best example I know because she's method of mind was always strong, even with her vehicle, all through this life. Because she, as options came her way, she'd say, I don't need to do that. I don't want to do that. My vehicle, just whatever it was, I had to jump into and try. But I think the only reason I did. What's that? That's the other half of the circle, if you understand what we mean by that. Because you had to have two teachers, one who knew that you didn't have to experience things, and one who realized what any of you could have gone through had you been victim of falling into those traps. In other words, I was going through my homework. I was prepared. It was rough, but I went through all that homework.
I had my task, he had his.
That's right. But humans need to know that you don't have to experience things. The lesson is, the gain is from the moment of confrontation with that, of then making a choice. Okay, we got call quit. See you later. Bye. Try to exercise your minds a little bit on writing segments about. We'll play like that. That we're going. We'll give you some structure, and we'll say that. Next month, now none of this is true, this is just play-like. Next month we're going to open a place, and it's going to be called Church of Genetic Improvement, non-sectarian. Okay? That sets the stage. Church of Genetic Improvement, non-sectarian. Yeah, it's a play-like. And you're going to say to anyone who would inquire as to what this was all about, you could, they would maybe read a little something that describes 2 or 3 things. One is that you believe that there is an intelligence that exists higher than human intelligence somewhere in the cosmos, and that that intelligence is responsible for tending to the earth and its yield, humans being a part of that yield. And the second thing that you believe is that humans can know more about that intelligence and can even become more like them by exercising a certain amount of understanding and restraint and self-control. And that the way they do that is by looking at everything from a genetic point of view. And that everything you are is genetic. Your programming, both mental and physical, is genetic. And we could say that maybe we're going to put into a computer little lessons that would be numbered. They would either be P1, P2, P3, P4 for physical genetic programming characteristics, or there'll be M1, M2, M3, M4 mental genetic programming lessons. Do you understand that? And let's say someone wants to understand something more about we're also going to present them with a general understanding of what we mean by genetic programming. And what we are coining that phrase to mean is that everything you are is what you are. Like every cell in your body has a programming. Part of that, or most of that programming, is what that body inherited from its ancestors. But that programming can also be programmed by the experiences that you have during this lifetime, about how you respond to experiences. Even things you listen to affect that programming. Things you experience that you like affect that programming, or things you experience that you don't like affect that programming. So it's not that everything is hereditary, it's that the basic framework was hereditary. The structure is there. And even of physical characteristics, even mental characteristics. And all those characteristics don't necessarily show their face at early stages. Like a lot of those characteristics are like time release things that may not show up until that vehicle would normally reach 30 or normally reach 40. Both physical and mental characteristics have time release. For example, someone may be essentially a happy-go-lucky individual during his teens and 20s and 30s, and then that begins to change in early 40s and 50s, and that can turn around and they become almost cynical and apathetic. And even that programming can be an inherited characteristic of that strain. And that programming is affected also by the nutrition that the body receives. The nutrients in the area, like the water in Oklahoma and the plants that grow there, the attitude of the people in that area. All these things contribute to the programming. The general accepted norm of how you're supposed to act and what you're supposed to be interested in, and the trend, what's popular, all that is influencing the program of the genes. Now, let's take I'll ask you the question. Let's say I wanted to write a little segment on eating what I've been brainwashed by the society I lived in. In other words, that's not good. What did we call it the other day? We said more having discriminating taste. Okay, let's say I'm going to write a segment on having discriminating taste about what I consume. Okay, what I would eat. Because Now, what would that be? Would that be mental or would that be physical? Physical. No. It's mental. The end result is physical, but it's a mental thing. Because now let's take genetically. How would that little segment be affected? My body has certain chemistry in it that I inherited. It might be allergic to certain things. Might have bad responses to certain things that I consume. And also the house that I grew up in, if they consumed certain things, then I've been programmed by the things that they consumed. I either was programmed to like them or I was programmed to dislike them. If I went off to a fancy school or lived in a social group in a certain city that thought it was in to eat escargot and have all the fancy things, then that influenced that programming. And the funny thing is that people talk about that you should be an individual and you should have very discriminating taste. And yet people don't think that you have discriminating taste if you don't like all of these things. You see what I'm saying? So what they're doing is telling you that this is the accepted norm, is that you should like all of these fancy things. You should force yourself to eat all these things, whether you like them or not. If you go on eating them, pretty soon you'll like them. We told the other group, or maybe it was on tape, something about boiled shrimp that this vehicle had experienced. I didn't finish telling you the story, because the rest of the story was that I eventually made myself like boiled shrimp, even to the point that I could eat it and even think I liked it. In other words, I had changed that program. I had forced that program to change. But actually, I probably did harm to the vehicle in the process, because I don't think it would have had such an extreme initial negative response to the boiled shrimp if it was good for the vehicle. But I forced it to like it, and because I thought that life would be a lot easier if it liked it, since shrimp seemed to be such an in thing in the world in which I circulated at that time. But it was not right. The proper discriminating taste would be to look at foods as essential nutrients and only doctor them up to the degree that you get the essentials in a condition that they're tolerable. Instead of going like the French chef, he doctors them up to the degree that the essential flavors are no longer there, or the basic flavors of what it was is no longer there. What you're getting is all the flavorings that were added to the sauces, and so forth. In other words, they kill the thing that it was that you're actually eating. They've covered it up, and it becomes another dish altogether, which isn't extreme. It's making something very ornate and elaborate out of something that would be a lot better nutrition for the vehicle if it was the simple thing. And now, if you had to add a little garlic to it to keep it from being so tasteless, or if you have to add a little salt or a little pepper, that's certainly not going too far, as long as that salt or that garlic isn't excessive. Sometimes you put so much garlic in some of the formulas, you've had the freedom to enlarge your garlic in that no one could stand to be in the same room. I guess you did. You put all that into the garlic, I guess, because you didn't have sauces and all these other options. But the point I'm making is that we can see, I've just used that as an example, that we can see that everything about your conduct, mental and physical, is related to your genes. And your task has been to control the genes and change them. And this is the only way you have accomplished what you have accomplished. This is what you try to do every day, as you don't let negative things happen. It's a part of your genetic structure to have moods, or to be bothered with temper, or to be bothered with sensuality or anything else that the vehicle can be bothered by. Now let's say that if Rhodey is fighting off anger and he lets it spill over onto Mercoti. When he lets it spill, he has not only hurt himself, then at that point he has passed the disease over to Mercoti. And that anger is trying to see if it can provoke that same genetic characteristic in Mercoti to anger. Now, you know, a funny thing I've noticed as T and I run sometime in the mornings, if I go by a certain area where there are dogs, because on the routes we take, we run into dogs in one neighborhood or another, and I've noticed if I go by an area and the dog barks, that if I go by there very quietly, pay no attention to him, just ignore him, that after a few days he gets used to me, and he doesn't even bark when I go by when he sees me coming. But I've also noticed that one little place that I went by, that these two little dogs there barked so ferociously one time that for fun I barked back, and they've never forgotten it. So that every time I get to that place, they bark ferociously because they remember that I barked back. Now your brain has that same problem that theirs has. Anytime you bark back at each other, you continue to see that person in the light of their having the potential of barking back at you. And it's almost like your brain won't forgive them for it. And you can almost justify your hostility because you know they are capable of the same kind of hostility, because you once heard them bark back. You see what I'm saying? So if you treat them like you did the dogs that you passed, very quietly and repeatedly, and pretty soon they don't notice you. If you do that same thing like with your classmates, and you never arouse them, you never empty that hostility on them, or some comment that would provoke negativity from them, soon they set up a vibration of not looking for it from you. And you're not contaminating them with what you have to deal with. Now, I probably got off the track time and time again, but all we want you to do is to think in terms of, on these little segments that you're writing, of zeroing it down to one little thing. And you can write a number of segments if you want to, but each one should be one topic related to genes. And in describing it, you can tell how it relates to the heredity aspect, the aspect of how the genes are affected in actual experiences as you encounter others. If you are one who has offsprings, in other words, if you didn't inherit something, but you participated in something, so that you have added a new characteristic to your genes, and then if you had an offspring, you would pass that new characteristic on to them. Every weakness you have is in the genetic structure. Every strength you have, every outstanding quality that you have is in that genetic structure. Therefore, you can put programs in your genetic structure, weaknesses or strengths. You can override weaknesses and you can increase strength. You can make all those characteristics good. It's just like when we have seen some of you go to Autocraft tasks, they can't believe that you have so many good characteristics, the humans that you're working for at your Autocraft task, and that you don't have so many vices. You know, that you're not careless, you don't show up when you get good and ready, you don't come in and complain about all the things that have gone on, and your language isn't foul, and you don't have to, you're not waiting desperately for that first coffee break, or not having to say, I've got to get outside and smoke a cigarette. In other words, you have controlled so much of your weaker areas and change your programming to be greater and greater percentage of only positive thinking and activity, that a human is right when he sees in you that he's got that he has a gem. He has someone that is primarily going to be of service. Do you want to say something? Okay, I know that I've flitted around a lot. My thinking hasn't been very organized, and if I had my way, we wouldn't have all the distraction that's behind me of these workers, and I wish we could meet with you all and talk more thoroughly with you about how we see everything as being genes. Because we want you to think in terms of everything as genes. And then if you can get that thinking clarified, then if you can write segments of lessons, it will help it clarify in your own thinking. So write these little segments as if you were writing them for someone else who had a difficulty in that area. Or if not a difficulty in that area, a potential in that area. Like let's say at this little church for genetic improvement, you have someone come and they see on this little list, maybe they're going to go listen to tapes. They see a list on all these tapes that you have, and they're all like Rody said, how to conquer addiction to this or that, how to develop this positive quality, how to eliminate this negative quality, how to be freer from distractions, how to be more detailed, how to be, and these how-tos is what we want you to come up with, both mental and physical, and to write them in an intelligent, interesting, stimulating way, so that they will get clarified in your own head in the process. Because we think a lot of times you take the lessons that have been given to you, you kind of take them for granted and don't really exert the effort to see what it is that you have learned. And like if you ever had to express it, like if an older member came to you and said, well, what have you learned? Well, see, I learned how to stay in tents for a while. I learned how to move into houses. And learned, that isn't what you've learned. In other words, we want you to know what it is that you have learned. And each one would be a completely different package if you wrote what you had learned, because it would depend upon what you had to deal with in your own programming. Everybody?
Well, I was I'm working on a segment about restraint, and what I wanted to do, if I understand correctly, was in presenting the understanding that I have to make it so that there is a logical and clear-cut sequence of thought, so that it leads you in your understanding to find a conclusion that restraint is something that is very good, is very beneficial and worthwhile. And I find that it takes a lot of, or thus far it's taken a lot of effort to make it as logical and as clear as I want it to be, so that when somebody reads it, it just really opens up their head so that they can understand it. And it helps me understand, I feel like it's helped me to see that I need to exert more effort in my understanding of some of what is probably in some cases I've learned more than I realized.
Well, see, it isn't easy to organize your thinking. And you could sit down and make a little outline, then go back and improve on it, and write it. If it doesn't say anything, don't bother sending it. Tear it up, start over, until you know it says something that you recognize as significant, that it was significant to you, and it could be significant to someone else, should we ever be in a position that we got instruction to give it to someone who was looking for that. We want it written in the kind of terminology that a human could read without any problems.
Of course, we don't care if you make it acceptable for publishing by some editor or something. In other words, what we want you to do is get back and not philosophize, no philosophy, and give out actual step-by-step ways they can control things.
Well, like in reading the book you got me on fixing things, it occurred to me that that's what must be what you had in mind. That's why I asked earlier about the how-to, because what they do is they say that, they present a problem, and then they break it down very systematically and very simply, say this is how you solve a problem, this is generally what it's caused by, and this is what you can do to prevent it in the future. And
the same thing. We want the same kind of structure in these little segments. We want the problem, or then the description or an understanding, clarification of it, and how to correct it.
We're very hard to please when it comes to what you send to us. Custodian, band study, and all of it know that, because in other words, we know what you're capable of doing, and if it isn't what you're capable of doing in our mind, then we will send it back to you and ask you to improve upon it. It doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't right, it just means that you can do better. And you don't want to look at it as though, well, this doesn't like what I wrote, and I'm not very good at it and all that. But if you had a thought and you wanted to write something, then you can do better than what you sent to us if we send it back to you. If you can understand that. In other words, don't accept defeat too easily. If links sends back, in fact, every one that's been sent to us, we have not accepted it. One was fairly good. I didn't read it over as part of it. I think didn't you say it was from Pam Moody?
Mm-hmm.
That was closer, but it still isn't good enough for Pam Moody.
It had a lot of good thoughts in it, but it was too general.
In other words, Pam Moody can do better, even though what she did do was better than what the others had said. In other words, if you want to sit down and write something, you want to do the best that you can. And if you send it to us and we say you can improve upon it, then take it back and try to improve upon it. Otherwise, you are dropping something because we didn't accept it the first time. And you don't want to be that weak. You want to be able to accomplish something since you started out to do it.
Take for granted that write what your segment, the segment that you're going to write about. Take for granted that it is going to be read. In other words, this is the approach you're taking. It's going to be read by someone who wants to correct this problem. You're not trying to talk them into correcting a problem. You see what we're saying? It's as if they have they have recognized they have this problem, and they're after a how-to. It's written in that context. Just like you recognized you had a problem, you needed to know more about maintenance work or carpentry or general maintenance work. You recognized the problem, and so you asked for some material. We gave you some material, and the material then gives you a very detailed step-by-step approach on what you're going to need, what you want to end up with, and then tells you how to get there and how to prevent it from falling apart. And the same thing you're going to do. You're going to assume. You're not going to preach. There's no sermons, because that would be assuming that you were going to convince them of something. You're not going to convince anybody of anything. They're coming with a problem, and you're saying, with this problem, the root of this problem is thus and so. You can help them understand the root. But see, we told you, we gave you the root system, right? It's genetic. Not only hereditary, but genetic by influence. And then we also told you in that little, like in the little play-like church premise that we said, was that you can become more like this intelligence that's somewhere in the cosmos that has something to do with tending this garden if you practice certain corrective genetic improvement. You see, so you're assuming that they want to become more like that. They want to correct this. They have found futility in not correcting it, or they wouldn't be looking for a how-to on correcting it.
I would like to know how, an example you gave of the boiled shrimp, how could you have known before you forced yourself to like it that maybe the fact that you didn't like it was for a good reason? How could you have recognized that beforehand so that you didn't go to the extreme of making yourself...
Well, I couldn't have at the time because there wasn't anybody around to encourage that kind of thinking. I didn't know of any... it was drummed into me from all sides. Everywhere I turned, that you should like everything, and anything you don't like, you should try to make yourself like it, so that you'll have a wide variety of things, which is wrong brainwashing.
Well, see, this is
Really?
what we...
Go ahead.
This is what we were saying before. With this vehicle that I had, I could care less if anybody, if I didn't like something, I never forced myself to eat it.
But when you were a child, you
I
had to force.
Right, I had to eat everything that was given to me like kids are supposed to do, you know. But when I reached an age where I had the freedom of choice, then I never consumed anything that I felt like didn't agree with my vehicle. Now this was what I came in with this vehicle with. Joe had the other side of the circle where he had to do what he had to do. You see the difference. This is what we talked about before. And the thing of it is, anytime my vehicle rejected something, I would never force it to eat it.
I guess what I was getting at, in trying to write about restraint, and from the experience I've had with this vehicle, I was afraid that I might leave the door open to some people using restraint inappropriately and restraining themselves from doing something that, like not eating boiled shrimp. Like, for example, it took me a while.
See, that's getting a kink in there that you shouldn't get in there. You've got to talk about where restraint is appropriate.
That's what I'm trying to get to.
You've got to get that detail and say where restraint is appropriate.
Like for you, it would have been appropriate had you known to refrain from eating boiled shrimp.
Look, I could have lived this vehicle, or any human could live a normal life without ever eating shrimp.
Right.
And it isn't a necessity for its consumption. Now, I must admit that you've got a little problem with some humans if they maybe learn to eat one or two things, and that's all they ever eat, and those two things aren't good for them. They've got a problem. They're going to have to do some reprogramming for their own sake. But the extreme is to like everything. And even the extreme of that is that the better things are the more doctored up things. You know, they take the worst thing humans take the worst thing you can think of and doctor it up and present it as the best thing. That's the reason I used escargot as an example. You know, there's nothing less appropriate for humans to eat than snails. There's some things in that same category, but there's nothing really any worse than snails. And so they fix a garlic butter sauce or this or that, different kinds of sauces where you dip those snails in, and they call them by French titles and then put them on a fancy menu, and they talk about it on the television or the radio or in the books on how to fix extra special foods. And so you think, oh, for heaven's sakes, I've got to certainly learn to eat escargot. And you go someplace where they have it, and the first thing they say, have you tried the escargot? And I must be some kind of dummy if I haven't. And that's the whole way the world works. It's like on this other thing that we were talking about the other day of birth control. It has gone to the same extreme, taking for granted that every youngster who comes up is going to need to use some kind of birth control apparatus by the time they're 12 or 13 years old. And so it's up to the parent to start teaching them about it and taking for granted that they're going to use it. Now those things, if we made any serviceable dent in this society, whether it's just through your thoughts or something that you could write down, it would be to start turning that around and having people realize that it is not right to accept that kind of activity as norm. It is not right to consider that kind of consumption as norm.
So if I'm writing something on restraint, and I'm going to give them an example, then I could use something like what you did and define the limits of extreme.
Right.
Well,
That's
first
right.
you can't write something on just restraint.
Well, he's taken that from the other day. I said restraint would be something that you could write on, but now we're asking you to zero in on specific
Right.
topics.
Right.
Well, I
Let's take one thing.
I think you're talking about, because when I started writing about restraint, it's such a...
It's too big of a field. That's the reason you have to take restraint of one item or
It's
one
like
topic.
painting and plumbing and carpentry and all that. You have to take, and they all can apply to repair. But you couldn't take the whole thing and write a report on repairing.
That's right, because they're all different.
It's all different. So you'd have to take each thing like what you watch on television. Have you ever wondered where those things, why the next level decided on the things that you were to view? The purpose, why they picked those particular kind of things? Have you ever wondered about it? Or did you just accept it? Okay, in a sense it's like reprogramming, because you might have been the one that liked to watch the Triple X movies on the cable, you know, or the soap operas, or the football. Soap operas, I think, is what we've heard is just
About what
Triple X.
everything is.
But the thing of it is, you ought to guard what you put into your computer very, very carefully.
Physically and mentally.
That's right, because this is why we want your actions to be so above human, so that you will not interfere with someone else's genes or their computer.
Now, we weren't against your writing about certain restraint in physical action or even sensuous action. We just said that you're not going to write something that says you got to give up sex, because that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But it wouldn't be inappropriate to talk about restraint and sensuality. You see what I'm saying? As long as you kept it in a framework that could apply to someone who was looking for restraint. Because believe it or not, some people have hit a dead end by knowing that their lack of restraint has only led them to the doctor many times with PD and kids by numerous people and all kinds of problems. And they just can't figure what is a way out. They had never considered that there could be such a thing as a life without sex or a reduced amount. But you can trigger that whole genetic system of sensuality by the least little thing. That's the reason we have told you to be so careful about what you observe or the thoughts that you let come into your mind or how you let your brain think about something. Because if it relates to a feeling, you trigger and almost open the gate, and then you can't close it because the gate flew open so wide. You know what I'm talking about? Am I talking in too general of a term?
Well, I'm not sure. I think I get it.
Well, let's say that you're walking down the street and this attractive girl comes along and you look at her a second time and you let register that's an attractive girl. And then you look at her a little bit more and you start letting register her figure or how she's carrying herself or whether or not she's glanced at you. You have triggered a whole mechanism in your system that takes 10 times the effort to shut the gate again on than it did to shut it immediately to prohibit yourself the first response. Do you follow that?
Yeah.
That's why in your discipline and in your self-control, you don't permit yourself thoughts, you don't even permit yourself caress of your own vehicle because it opens the door. It stimulates that whole area of genetic structure. And then it's like you have to go through an enormous battle maybe to get it closed again, or before you got it closed again, that you wouldn't have had to go through if you had been more severe in your restraint on that topic from the beginning. Because I dare say that a lot of you still stimulate an open gate that you regret so seriously a few hours later or a day or two later because it's so hard to close it, and that yet you don't realize how little it takes to open that gate, to make it so difficult. You can stand in front of the mirror combing your hair long enough to open that gate. Do you see what I'm saying? If you permit your vibration to tune into how you look, or whether or not I still don't look too bad, or the vehicle might have a little bit left in it, or start letting those thoughts become physical, and it's just like then you can even stop thinking about the topic, and the mechanism keeps right on going as if the gate is still open, and you will be battling for days to close that gate that would have been so easy to latch if you had seen the earmarks of it at the beginning. And this is true of all these characteristics of anger and hostility, lethargy, laziness, all of them. They have offshoots. You have to work hard to discourage bad programming, and hard to encourage and develop good programming. You can't just because you see the value of becoming, like let's say Anioti might recognize she has a tendency to be too slow. Just because she sees the value of not being slow doesn't mean she has corrected the problem. Every time she takes off to walk or does anything, she has to exert a great amount of effort to be the opposite of slow. Anioti needs to be the one that everybody's saying, "Slow down, Anioti! You're going so fast." Because that would show that she is really putting out the effort to conquer what in her genetic structure was a negative.
So, taking what you said, let's say if I wrote 50 lesson statements, and every one of them I used that principle that you just gave about how not to open the gate by using restraint, and that wouldn't be overkill, would it?
No, not really.
Okay.
I'd have to read it to see how you presented it.
Because what you were saying, if I understood correctly, that a principle will apply in anything.
That's right. It does. And humans know zero restraint in this area. It's just like if we had a make-believe church, we would have to start off by saying, if you come here to our place to play our tapes or to learn something or to help us help you through counseling to diagnose what your genetic problem areas are and strong points are, so that you know what you're going to work on, we don't want to know your name. Make up a name, give us a name, because we don't want to know. Because that opens a gate that humans normally want to open. They want to know your name. Where do you live? Where did you go to school? Where are your folks? What do you eat? Do you go out here to dance? It's just an unending curiosity about you that we want to have none of. None of. We don't want to know anything about you. We're there for one purpose only, and that purpose is to help you if you seek help in this particular area.
Is that the principle you talked about of restraining and keeping the gate closed? Is that one like? Well, let me go back. Before, when we talked about, we've had a lot of procedures you've always corrected it. You said, no, you don't. You have just very few. They're just a few basics. That's one of the basics. Right?
That's right. Certainly is. It's the one restraint is you've been programmed genetically, and you've been programmed in this lifetime. Your vehicle has to have no restraint. The extreme in that was this period just a few years ago that said, if it feels good, do it. And it made you feel like if you didn't dabble in everything to find out if it felt good enough, you were a square. In other words, it was encouraging you to just throw your life away in addiction, so that you had no direction yourself. You were merely a slave to the things that you had become hooked on. Well, not
a bumper sticker where it said ending hunger is ending hunger, the time has come. What is it?
I don't remember.
Ending hunger is the time that has come, or something like that, meaning the time has come now for us to end hunger. In other words, it can't go on any longer. That's the saying now. In other words, the time has come for these things. So let's say restraint, gaining restraint or exercising restraint. The time has come in order for people to start practicing restraint. Like Joe said way back in the 60s or 70s, it said if it feels good, do it. Now we're saying that's past because it's restraint that you're working on this.
And this is the time for it. There's never been a time when it was more appropriate to turn conduct around so that genes can be improved. That's the reason you don't realize what a big statement it is to say genetic improvement. Because if people realize that everything they are is collectively genes, every experience plus everything is passed down to them, all of their mental and physical characteristics are all genetic, and that they can actually change all of those characteristics or make a great dent in them. They can change the mental ones easier than they can change the physical ones. But if the mental ones change, then the physical ones begin to change as the mental ones change.
On the news the other day, they had a thing about healthy homes, how to eat heart disease and all that, and diet and exercise. And the commentator made the comment that we die the way we do because we live the way we do. And there's really emphasis on lifestyle and how you can improve your life by changing your lifestyle, which I thought was really good because we came right after we started studying in the 70s.
Well, that's a way of looking at people who would come for this help. They're looking for a way to change their lifestyles. He said the other day, like, if they had a certain problem, the first thing they'd have to do is change their environment so that that problem wasn't so dominant in that environment. They may have to change their job. They may have to change the neighborhood they live in. They may have to change their circle of friends, or whatever it is that has crowded in on them so that the characteristic they would like to get rid of doesn't stand a chance under those existing circumstances. Well, we better stop.
Listen, in place of making...
Shall I turn this on?
Oh, yeah.
We were talking a little bit more about genes and how the brain is what expresses this genetic structure and the programming of your genes, and how you all are the only ones who are freeing yourself from that unrestrained expression of whatever it is that your genes feel, negatively and positively. And that how they got to thinking about souls and even reincarnation is because they realized that that living force is transmitted. In other words, it doesn't really die. If an offspring occurs, it is a living sperm with a living egg, and they both had all that programming, which has never died, and it went that way. Now, since you're not into offspring, your genetic impression upon others, instead of just passing on whatever package you happen to be in confinement with somebody else's package, you have very, very controlled genes, so that you let only certain things be expressed, and certain things have action both physically and mentally. And as you come in contact with anybody, even silently, you are affecting their genetic structure. Even like at your out-of-craft task, if someone sees your conduct and they recognize it for being good, it's affecting their genetic structure. Or even if they don't recognize that your conduct is good, but when they're in your presence, they recognize that maybe some of theirs isn't so good.